Everything that I do for their grading is based on 4 categories. So I assess their knowledge, their planning, their performance, and their reflection and engagement. So there's 4 different categories, and each one of those is going to tie into a specific standard. And so, like, let's say that we're doing pickleball, just as an example, and I might want to assess their performance, and I want to assess their engagement. Well, there's going to be different standards that I can assess that meet those criterion, and then from there it's a 4-3-2-1 grade based on where they're at. It's not a daily, and really that's where it just comes down to helping the students understand that this is a progressive thing, the progressive system, where, hey, today you might be a 2, but at the end of the unit, if you're at a 4, that's going to be your grade for the unit. And it's not a punitive system where it's like, well, getting dressed and doing your job, that's not enough anymore for an effective grade. So they come in, that's where, so let's say I'm in a pickleball unit, we'll come in, we'll go over the skills, I'll introduce the skills, we'll get like a pre-test, and then we'll do another test in the middle, and then we'll do our final assessment based on their skill at the end, and then they'll get a grade on their skill, which ties into a standard, and that's one criterion that I assess. And then there's I've done anything from like a glow and grow, where they're reflecting every day and doing a quick write reflection, whether it's on their Chromebooks or paper. Hey, this is what I did well today, this is what I want to do better. You can assess that, or you can have them reflect, or have their partner reflect on how well they work together as teammates, and then that's a different standard. So it's just taking the standard, which standard fits into which category, and so then it's like, hey, this one fits well with performance, or this standard fits well with engagement, this standard fits well with use of knowledge, which would be like a test, a quiz, a paper, something along those lines. All right, my name's Lance Weckerle. I teach physical education at Pittman High School to 9th grade students, and I'm also the head varsity football coach at Pittman High School. I've been at Pittman this is my 4th year. I did my student teaching at Pittman High School in 2009, and then I got hired in 2010 to Stockton Collegiate International Schools, which was a brand new opening IB charter school in downtown Stockton. So in my first year of teaching, I got hired on to open up a brand new school. So that was pretty cool to be a part of. And so I taught that for 6 years there, and I taught everything from 3rd grade to 11th grade, mostly 9th, 10th, 11th grade there, but a couple small classes of elementary when we were first starting.
Did you say IB?
Yeah, it was an international baccalaureate curriculum.
Yep. Okay. So how are your experiences teaching IB, and how does it compare to teaching in, I guess, call it a traditional school, mainstream school? How do they compare? What did you like more? What do you like less?
Well, actually, I thought it was pretty important to have the opportunity to go there, because my only experience at that point had been at a traditional school, whether it was myself as a student or myself as a credential candidate and a student teacher. That was the only experience I had. So I was kind of always looking through things through the same lens. And so then when I got into the IB world and that's really what helped develop my assessment methods and understand how to use rubrics. Everything that they had designed, they already had the rubrics designed as an IB school. The International Baccalaureate curriculum uses the same rubrics, whether it's in Stockton or whether it's in another country. So they already had everything formatted. Then it was adjusting my teaching practices to teach and make sure that I was assessing the rubrics correctly. So that was the biggest change, and that was a little bit challenging, but it was one that I embraced, and that really helped shape the way I assess now currently in a public school system.
Did you appreciate having the rubrics kind of already made up for you, and then you could kind of just tailor your teaching with these expectations that were already set, like right out of the gate?
Yeah, at first it was a little bit, obviously it was new, using the rubrics and using the IB model. The curriculum was new. So it was like relearning and reteaching everything that I had already learned. I was relearning it in a different method. But after it was established, it was like, all right, I understand it. It took about 2 years to fully understand what I was doing.
Excellent. What was your experience like in the credential program? Did you feel like it was wired and geared more towards classroom teachers? Did you feel like kind of the odd man out when it came to the TPAs and I don't know, classroom activities and assignments and stuff like that?
Yeah, I thought the TPAs I thought were okay because the videoing and the reflection on the teaching practices, I thought that was pretty easy and adaptable to what we do in PE. That wasn't so much the issue, but the examples and all the different I can't remember. It's been over a decade now, but some of the because you have like the English learner class, right?
Yes.
And so some of the examples in those, there wasn't very many specific examples of how to adapt that information to our PE world. Um, as far as a specific example. And so that part was a little bit of a challenge. But I had Dr. Andrews. She was my cohort teacher, and she was an ex-coach and such. So she understood how to relate things to us in the PE world to help us be successful in the credential program.
And did you say that you did your student teaching at Pittman?
Yes, I did. Yep.
So can you kind of speak to your student teaching experience then leading to a job? I mean, maybe do you have any thoughts on students that are in the credential program now that maybe really want to stay at the site that they're student teaching at? Do you have any tips or advice you could give them?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit to one of the questions we talked about professionalism, but the second that I got my placement in the credential program, I went in and we met with the vice principal that was in charge of our placement, and sat down and shook her hand and thanked her very much for having me on the campus, and just tried to understand the dynamic of the campus and what was going on. And then whenever I had questions, I would go back and we would just have regular professional dialogue. And then when my time was up, again, I just shook her hand and told her, thank you very much for having me. Obviously, I made good relationships with the people that were on campus as well. I worked with my master teacher, but then I also worked with the other PE teachers in the department. And then I observed a health teacher, and I observed a special ed, and I observed English language teachers. So I just tried to make little connections all over our campus. And so then when I was teaching in Stockton, I taught there for 6 years. I mean, my goal was always to get back to Pittman, but I didn't know that it would be a reality. And then when they had an opening, it just so happened that the assistant principal who placed me with my master teacher then was the principal at Pittman at the time. And so we already had established professional dialogue and relationship. And so I don't know I mean, obviously I still had to perform in the classroom, and I had to be able to explain the way I teach in the interview. But just by having those dialogues, they kind of get a better idea of who you are and what you're about. And so I thought that was a very pivotal piece that played down the road 10 or 6 years after I did my student teaching. It gave me an opportunity to get my foot in the door and get back on campus.
When you were student teaching, how do you feel like you made yourself useful? Did you do any type of extra volunteer work or any type of coaching, or did you make yourself an asset on campus?
I actually didn't coach. I really wanted to, but I wanted to make sure that I took care of my teaching, which was hard because, I mean, obviously now I'm the head football coach and I wanted to coach, and the football coaches wanted me to coach, but I didn't feel like I could really focus at that time on just one thing, or on two things. I needed to focus on just one thing, and that was to be the best teacher I could be and to take care of my stuff in the classroom first. But I set up a couple field trips. One of those field trips, I took one of my strength training classes, and we came over to the college, and we went in and watched the women's softball workout with Coach Fraze was there. I don't know if he's still there, or no, sorry, was I can't remember his name anymore. It was a long time ago, but I came over and we watched the women's softball, so they could kind of see, hey, this is what high school strength training looks like. Here's what collegiate strength training looks like, and just tried to do some extracurricular stuff like that. But I didn't do any sort of coaching at that time.
Okay, excellent. Well, it sounds like you made a really, you know, uh, you made a decision to only focus on one thing while you were in the credential program, which I think is important because sometimes students overload themselves and they're still trying to work a job, and then they're in the program, and then they're working on TPAs, and then they're trying to do too many things at once, and then they're doing everything poorly. So I think that it's good to just focus your attention on one thing. The rumor, now I don't know, you can speak to this, is that the PE jobs are pretty hard to come by. Do you feel like that's the case?
The good ones are, yes.
Okay, can you speak to that? What's the difference between a good PE job and a bad PE job, in your opinion, then?
Well, I mean, so when I got hired at Pittman, just as an example, they hadn't hired a PE teacher in Turlock Unified for 14 years.
Oh, jeez.
So just to kind of give you an example of how long it'd been since they hired a PE teacher in Turlock Unified. So I think when you get into good districts that take care of their people, of their teachers, and you have good schools that have good support systems and good staffs, good students, I think all those things make it a quality job. You know, as far as not just our livelihood as a teacher and our income, but the what you get in the classroom and on the campus on a daily basis. That all makes it a quality job. So when you have a position that's open that hasn't been open for 14 years, I think that kind of speaks to a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want you to put you in a position where you have to brag too much, but I'm curious if that was the first time they hired in 14 years for a PE position, there was probably a lot of competition for that job. Why do you think you were selected?
Well, two things. One, I think the opportunity to get my foot in the interview, because obviously at that point I only had 6 years of experience. But getting my foot in the interview had to do with the professional relationships I established during my student teaching. And then two, once I got my foot in the door, and my time in Stockton, we had an intervention period, which at Pittman we have pride time. We call it something different in Stockton, but the use of intervention and how we respond to kids that need intervention, and then the IB system and the way that they use standard-based grading using rubrics, being able to explain that in an interview, I think that was the thing that got myself the job, just because I was able to explain the way I grade in a different. It's not a points based system. So in a world where most PE students are going to be used to, hey, I'm going to give you so many points a day, or so many points for this activity, or so many points for the mile, that's not the direction that I assess, and that's not the way I be assessed. And so when I was able to bring something new like that, which is the direction of education, it's like, hey, we got a guy here that already has been doing it for 6 years, so he can help kind of try and facilitate that direction for the future.
How does that model work? Can you tell us about it? It sounds like it's standard-based grading from what I'm hearing.
Yep. Yeah. So for, I mean, yeah, I could talk for hours about the way I
No,
assess.
I'd love to hear about it. I think the students would too. So maybe not an hour, but a solid 10 minutes would be great.
Yeah, we could do it. We could do another one too down the road, and I could give them specific examples. But everything that I do for their grading is based on 4 categories. So I assess their knowledge, their planning, their performance, and their reflection and engagement. So there's 4 different categories, and each one of those is going to tie into a specific standard. And so, like, let's say that we're doing pickleball, just as an example, and I might want to assess their performance, and I want to assess their engagement. Well, there's going to be different standards that I can assess that meet those criterion. And then from there, it's a 4-3-2-1 grade based on where they're at. It's not a daily, and really that's where it just comes down to helping the students understand that this is a progressive the progressive system where, hey, today you might be a 2, but at the end of the unit, if you're at a 4, that's going to be your grade for the unit. And it's not a punitive system where it's like, well, getting dressed and doing your job, that's not enough anymore for an effective grade. So they come in, that's where, so let's say I'm in a pickleball unit, we'll come in, we'll go over the skills. I'll introduce the skills. We'll get like a pre-test, and then we'll do another test in the middle, and then we'll do our final assessment based on their skill at the end, and then they'll get a grade on their skill, which ties into a standard, and that's one criterion at ISS. And then there's I've done anything from like a glow and grow, where they're reflecting every day and doing a quick write reflection, whether it's on their Chromebooks or paper. Hey, this is what I did well today. This is what I want to do better. You can assess that, or you can have them reflect, or have their partner reflect on how well they work together as teammates. And then that's a different standard. So it's just taking the standard, which standard fits into which category. And so then it's like, hey, this one fits well with performance, or this standard fits well with engagement. This standard fits well with use of knowledge, which would be like a test, a quiz, a paper, something along those lines.
And are all the PE teachers at Pittman on board with this kind of, I'll call it a new system, or is it kind of a mixture? Do you feel alienated in that you're one of the only teachers doing this, or tell us about that experience?
Well, so I've been the PLC lead the last few years. And so what's been exciting is several of the other teachers have started using rubrics. And so just getting them on the page of like, hey, listen, if we give them the rubric at the beginning of the unit, they know what's expected. Then when we do a pre-test on this skill, for example, they can see where they're at, and they can see where they need to get to. And then when we model it for them, or we show them a peer that is at a 4 or an A, now they know what it takes to get there. And so they can kind of have that vision to work towards that. So some of the teachers are using rubrics, which breaks down the grading system for them, but not everybody's on a 4-3-2-1 grading system yet. And then not everybody's using the rubrics for everything. Right now it's just a couple different units, but that's progress. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you could eventually get everybody on board? Or are you going to kind of just wait for those people to phase out and then get new people in, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's a little bit of both. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of respect for all. I mean, they've been teaching for as long as I've been alive, some of them. So,
absolutely.
So they have a lot of experience in what they've done and why it works a certain way. But I mean, we're just right now, our focus is to try and get, like, for next year, we want to have a whole semester where myself and the teachers are using rubrics, where we're using rubrics for the whole fall semester, and they're the same rubrics. That's kind of the mission for next year. They use like 10-point scales or 100-point scales for now, which is fine. We can tackle that when we get there. For now, we're using rubrics. It's common language. The grades are different. I mean, if I give a 4 and that's an A, and they give a 90 points and that's an A, or 9 points and it's an A, it's the same, more or less the same percentage or ratio. It's just different point scale. So
I'm kind of curious, because I'm not super familiar with standards-based grading when it comes to PE. What if you have a kid that's just hard worker, shows up every day, good attitude, just not coordinated, not athletic? Would that student, maybe slow mile time, would that student have the opportunity to still earn an A because they're able to reflect and show progress? Or is it a situation where, I'll throw out an example, like if you can't run a sub 7-minute mile, there's just no way you're going to get an A in PE at Pittman? I'm legitimately curious how that works.
That was actually what got me bought in when I started doing the IB program, was when I finally started understanding, like, hey, I got a kid that comes to school and works hard, but they're not athletically gifted, but they can still get an A because they can do well in their knowledge aspect, which their standards for. And so that's whether I want to test them with a test or with a paper or like a rules assessment. So there's different ways to test their knowledge, so they could do well there. There's a planning component. So like I'll do a teach a game. So I'll put together a team of students, and they'll have to say, hey, we're going to create and do this game. And so it takes them through, in the IB system, we call it the design cycle, where they're thinking of something, and then they investigate it, and then they do some research, and then they put together a plan, and then they test their plan. So kind of like a hypothesis for science, or if you will, is that they're going to test this. And so then they go and they teach the game, and then they have to reflect on it and what they did well and what they didn't do. But for students to be able to put together a whole plan, that requires some critical thinking. So you guide them through, hey, today, this is what your goal should be. today, this is the piece of the product that you should have done. And so you have students that can do that well. And then the reflection, or, you know, they could be great kids that work well with others, but they're just not athletically gifted. If they're working well with others, then those things should average out their performance grade. So let's say that they're like a B or a C kid performance wise, but they're an A for their use of knowledge and an A for their engagement and their A for planning. That'll fix their average.
And then the flip
So they'll
side of
have
that,
so
the flip side of that, do you encounter students that are naturally athletic and gifted, and then they maybe don't buy into, I'll call it the academic kind of angle that you're bringing in? What do you do with those students? Because I can imagine you might encounter those students pretty frequently.
Yeah, I have more of the kids that do well physically and they don't want to do the academic piece. That's the bigger challenge. And that's where I've had to, going from where I was in Stockton to Turlock at Pittman High, I've had to really kind of like pare down the day by day, step by step, what it is that they're writing and what it is that we're working on, so that it's very progressive and laid out, but in small sample sizes. Which, when I was reading the questions, you talked about how to keep kids engaged. And what I try to do in PE is everything that we do is in small chunks and increments of time, so that they don't get bored and start drifting off. And so same thing with any sort of writing we do. It's one or two prompts, and then we'll build that into the whole overall, whatever it is that we're working on down the road, whether it's a paper or something along those lines, so that they don't feel overwhelmed. You know, like, hey, you're taking out the door, you have 2 questions, you have to answer these 2 questions in 2 sentences each, and then you're done. And all of a sudden they wrote a quick paragraph, you know. But
So,
I give them the prompts to try and help them.
so speaking of engagement, what you mentioned that what I'm hearing is you try to do things in small pieces so that kids don't get bored and they don't lose focus. What are some of your other strategies for keeping kids engaged?
I mean, every day we start our day with a quick run, and I have about 5 or 6 different runs, and I'll never tell them. I'll keep them they're always like, which way are we going, you know? And so we do a quick run, and then we can get into our daily warm up and our exercises for the day, and kind of like, hey, this is the direction. That gives me an opportunity to tell them where we're headed. It gives it, especially afternoon for PE teachers, afternoon classes are always going to be harder than your morning classes as far as focus. As far as getting them going, your morning classes are always going to be a little bit more of a challenge because they're still asleep and they didn't have breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going. Usually the best classes as far as attention and energy is usually right before lunch. Those are usually the ones that have the best combination. Your morning isn't going to have much energy, and your afternoon is not going to have focus because they just had a bunch of sugar for lunch.
Yeah.
So using the running kind of gets them moving their body a little bit. And that's where I've even flipped it to changing the whole way I do things with the mornings and the afternoons. Sometimes there's been years where I've had to take whatever I do first in the morning, I do that last in the afternoon. Like if it's a quick write, that's the last thing I do in the afternoon. And it might be the first thing I do in the morning, because in the morning I can get them going on that, and then we can go exercise and it kind of gets them warmed up. If I do that coming in right after lunch, we go do a quick write right after lunch, they're shot. They've been sitting in class for 4 hours already, and then they just had a bunch of sugar at lunch. They need to move their body and get out and exercise a little bit. And then at the end of class, when they're tired and sweaty, now we can do a quick write and they'll be able to focus for 3 minutes and put down their words. So
What do you do with a student who's just completely unmotivated, doesn't want to dress out, is just walking when they're supposed to be running, doesn't want to engage? Just, you can clearly see that like your content area is just not for them at all. Like what does a discussion look like with one of those students? How can you motivate those students? And if you can, what do you say or do to motivate them?
well, so I mean, I kind of jumping ahead, but one of the things when we were talking, or when I was reading through the questions, that one of the best things I did for myself was I went and I took some of the administration classes at Stanislaus.
Okay.
And so they go over ed code, and that was another opportunity for an eye opener, because I was used to the traditional way that PE's been run for years. And if you don't dress out, it's certain minus points or whatever the situation is. Well, that's actually technically a code. And so by learning those things, it was like, all right, I need to approach this differently. So
Sorry, you cut out for a second. Did you say that's technically illegal?
mhm.
Okay, that's what I thought you said, but there was a little hiccup in the connection, but I
Yeah,
wanted to make sure. Okay, go ahead.
yeah. Technically, if you're punitive, if you're affecting a kid's grade for not dressing out, that's a violation of ed code. So it was good information. So I'm just kind of going around as far as the admin classes. It was a good opportunity for me to kind of pick up some extra information about how to run a class the right way.
Mhm.
So as far as, so then the way that we do things at Pittman, if a kid doesn't have their PE clothes, we have loaners clothes for them. And so they can borrow those. We wash them every day. Then if they choose not to, okay, the first time it's a conversation and usually a call home and just trying to understand what the issue is, because we have like, hey, we have clean loaners for you. Why aren't you dressing out? I don't want to today. Well, that's not the way that it works. And it's a conversation, a call home. And then after that, then it's at Pittman, they go see the dean, and then it's usually a detention or something along those lines. So it's nice to have the support from administration that doesn't give them the opportunity or option to not dress out. And usually between having conversation with them and their parents, it usually doesn't go much beyond that. So but then as far as getting a kid moving that doesn't really want to move early in the year, so for new teachers, the first couple weeks of school, that's going to be your honeymoon phase, and the kids are all going to be on their best behavior. Like that's as good as you're going to get from all of them the rest of the year, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But you should be able to, as you develop your craft as a teacher, you'll start to figure out how to, it's not, I wouldn't call it like stereotyping, but you're going to be able to pick out tendencies between certain kids and their behaviors, and what type of behavior you'll get the rest of the school year. And so I just use those first few weeks to try and develop relationships with the kids so that we can have a good working relationship, just trying to understand who they are and kind of what they like and what they're about. And then it's from there, it's really the rest of the year, it's about what I learned there. So for example, I have a student who is a little bit on the spectrum,
Mhm.
but he's pretty functional. Well, a few weeks ago, go out to class and he's saying some pretty inappropriate things. So as the class is doing their run, I pull him aside and just talk to him. I'm like, hey, like, what's going on? You don't normally talk that way. And he was trying to act cool, make friends, and I was like, well, if you use that kind of language, we're going to have a meeting with your dad. And it instantly was like, no, 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 no. And that's because I learned that, this particular student is almost afraid and scared of his father. So it's not something I rely on a regular basis, but in that example, it's like, well, if you're doing this, then that means we're going to have to meet with him. And so just having that conversation for him to know that it's a measure I could take if we need to, it changed his attitude, and he was fine, and never had any more issues after that. So it's just really about when we do our lessons, I try to make them as relevant as possible. I always use analogies of a car that kids want to drive. So I always talk about, all right, so today we're going to do this. If you were to have a car and take it in and get your tires changed, that would be the relationship to doing what we're doing today. Or, hey, if you're going to eat this, then this is what it would be like if you were to put this kind of gas in your car. I try to relate those things to them to make it relevant for them so that hopefully you get a little more buy-in.
How many kids do you have on a roster for a given period?
It fluctuates. Earlier in the year, they're bigger. In Turlock Unified, we have the 7-period athletics, which is awesome because then the kids that are in sports can exit out of PE, and then it gives us the opportunity to really work with the kids that aren't athletic or love sports. So my class rosters kind of range anywhere from about 25 to 45. It just depends on the period, and it depends on the day.
So this is the magic question, how do you manage 45 you teach all freshmen exclusively when it comes to PE.
Yep.
So
Yep.
tell us how you manage 45 freshmen. What's the key? Because I know that the students are dying to know what the secret is.
Easily. No. No. Well, so to start the day, we come in, we do a quick run. You're gonna get kids from all different speed and athletic abilities, and then from there we'll go into, they'll be in some sort of team or line, and we'll do a quick warm up or stretch or workout. So if you have those kind of planned out as far as how you want them to stand or be in position, so that they're not choosing, just don't want to give them the choice of where they're going to be for the workout. And then from there, it's just about keeping them moving. And so like I said, the first 10 to 15 minutes, I try and lead the majority of the class, whether it's a dynamic warm up or a quick workout. And it's, hey, we're going to do 30 seconds of this. Okay, now stand up. We're going to do 30 seconds of squats. Okay, now we're going to go into this stretch. And so everything is chunked out in quick time so that they don't have an opportunity to have conversations or to get lost or to do those kinds of things. And then once you go into your so let's say that we're going into let's say we're going to go with pickleball just as an example, because that's a little bit harder when you have a class of 40 kids. I'll put them in groups of 3. Hey, these are I call them countries. So for pickleball, they pick a country, and that's the country they represent. So if I say Germany, you're over here, or the US, you're here, then they always know where they belong based on the country. And so then, let's say that we're just getting started with our pickleball unit, and we're going to work on serving today. So I'm going to send each group to a court, and I'm going to say, all right, 2 people stand on the opposite side, 1 person stand here, and I'll demonstrate, okay, here's your serve. Your goal is to serve it from one box to the other side. And then you guys are going to collect the ball, and then you'll rotate in a clockwise rotation. So 1 person comes over, the other person goes back, and then next person goes. And so 1 person is serving, the other 2 are fetching the wiffle balls real quick, and then they'd repeat it. And then I'll have them come back after 5 minutes of that. And then, okay, now we're going to do this, and I'll switch up the activity they do, so that really you're not giving them much time. I mean, if you figure 5 minutes, that gives them 90 seconds each to work on their serve. And now, okay, this is how you're going to serve this time. So it's the same skill, but we're doing it in a different method. And so what that'll do is it doesn't get redundant for them, but they don't realize they're doing the same thing, so that they should be improving their overall skill. I mean, 90 seconds isn't enough time to get better. So we want to try and figure out how do we chunk in multiple 90-second segments within a 15 or 20 minute period to give them as many opportunities to practice their serve as possible.
Excellent. The students that are going to be watching this video, they're really stressed out because of all this crazy school shutting down business. But before all of that, they're just stressed out because they're on the job hunt, and then they are working on TPAs, and then they still have coursework at Stand, and they're juggling a lot. So one of the questions you probably saw that I sent you was what was one of your greatest challenges when it came to your educational career, and then how did you overcome it?
So during my credential, I was out duck hunting, and I got muzzle blasted, and I lost the hearing in my left ear.
Whoa.
And so that was while I was student teaching. So I had to, in the middle of my student teaching, I had to start learning how to teach with only being able to hear well out of one ear. So that was a little bit of a challenge because everything is a little bit off. But as far as the load that they're carrying, I mean, there's what's that quote? It's not about the load. It's about how you carry it. Mm-hmm. And how you manage it. So, I mean, as far as if they're taking on extra teaching or coaching duties, I would say I would try and limit those as best as you can, and just focus on doing one thing really well rather than doing 3 things okay.
For students that are interested in coaching, and maybe they have a sport that they really love, and let's say I'm throughout softball, you got somebody in the program and they really, really want to coach softball. what would be your suggestions for that person to eventually get to be the coach of the sport that they really want to coach?
Well, I mean, everyone's different and everyone's going to manage it different. If they've been coaching softball, then perhaps they can manage coaching softball, for example, while they're in the credential program.
Mhm.
It's possible that they could manage it. If they're trying to start coaching for the first time, I don't know that that's something that you should take on, but everyone's different. But trying to take on a new coaching activity while you're student teaching, that to me sounds like a little bit too much for one's plate. But then if you're wanting, and that's where I think you have to, how do I say this? Um, if you know the district where you're student teaching and you know that there's going to be an opening, then developing those relationships right away is a good thing, because then it's going to give you an opportunity, like, hey, in 6 months there's going to be an opening, so you start developing those relationships, and then that way when there is an opening, hey, I student taught and I coached, so it kind of gets your foot in the door a little bit extra, I guess, because you're developing those relationships that you wouldn't have otherwise. But beyond that, the coaching is always, I think it's important for phys ed teachers to coach, because you're in the locker room, you get to interact with athletes and students all the time. So I think that, I don't think it's a must, but if I was a principal at a school, I would be hiring teachers that coached instead of just teachers. Personally, that's just my philosophy. You can have a good teacher, but they might not coach. You can have a good teacher that does coach. They're going to do more jobs on campus. And that's ultimately, and I mean, that's just my philosophy, but what are you going to bring to the table that no one else is going to? Or how are you going to breathe life back into a campus and there's multiple roles as a teacher on campus, as I'm sure you know, whether it's a club advisor or whether it's an athletic coach or whether it's a PLC lead or an intervention or a band director. I mean, there's so many different roles on campus. So it's, what are you going to bring to the table? It's going to breathe life back into that campus.
And if you're on campus and you're an employee and there's you really wanted, let's say, softball again, would you recommend, let's say that they're done with the program and they're working, but they don't need a softball coach, they need the JV or the freshman soccer coach. Would you recommend that they just take whatever coaching positions are available and kind of build up a reputation in order to get where they want to be? Or should they hold out and wait until the coaching position comes available that they're interested in? Or I don't know, how does that process work?
I mean, personally, I've always been the one that I want to learn something new.
Okay.
So, you know, if you've never played soccer, but a JV soccer position comes available, if you're an effective, hopefully, if you're an effective, in this case, PE teacher or just teacher in general, I would like to think that anyone could learn how to coach it and to teach the skills and whatnot effectively.
You mentioned that you're in the locker room with students, and I imagine that you probably have, when it comes to your student athletes, you probably have kind of deeper relationships with those students that you're working with. How do you deal with getting, I don't know, having difficult discussions with students? Like maybe, I think what I'm trying to get at is maybe they share things with you that they wouldn't with other teachers because you have that relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, how do you deal with, like, if students are sharing information with you that, I don't know, you feel maybe is too personal or you feel like puts you in a strange position? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, I've had all of those situations, and I've had it happen with athletes, and I've had it happen with regular students, and it just depends. And that's where, I mean, I don't know that I have an exact answer other than like whatever your gut instinct says. I've had female students say inappropriate things, and so that's just like, hey, we got to go to the office and clear this up right now, because I'm not going to lose my job because of the way it's said. I've had students with issues, whether it's been abuse or like suicidal thoughts or cutting themselves, and so that's something where we got to go to the counselors right away, make sure that it's, and the hard part is that they're coming to you usually in confidence, because they were like, hey, like, I relate to you, I want to tell you about this, really they want to get it out. They just don't know how. And so they're kind of using you as that avenue. And so you just got to be the person that says, all right, like, it's important that we go see somebody and get you the help that you need right now. And like, I had a girl and I was like, listen, we're going to go talk together right now with the counselor, because she was cutting herself. And I was like, it's not me. It's that we need to go right now. It's in your best interest that we go talk with the counselor. And so, I said, I apologize if you feel like I'm violating your trust, but this is what's best for you. And then the next day she came and she gave me a huge thank you and just said, like thanks for getting me help and whatnot. And it was just important that we did that. Another example was a student, just a general student that confided in me that she was getting sexually abused, and so it got her the help that she needed. And so, and at that time she didn't want it to be addressed with the counselors and the admin, but brought them in and they got her the help she needed. And that was like 3 years ago. And now, and she still comes in on occasion, stops in, just says hi, like I'm doing well, and lets me know that she's doing fine. And that was just developing a good working relationship with a student. And you're going to develop those with athletes as well. But it's the same thing as far as where that line is. I use high fives. I tell them when they graduate, if you want to hug when you graduate, I'll give you a hug when you graduate. But until then, it's high fives. And that's just the way that I do things. So.
You already spoke a little earlier about professionalism, and you were talking about building the relationship with the AP, who then became the principal, correct?
Correct.
So I think the message that students should take away from that is you don't know who is going to be who in the future. Like, you don't know what positions and roles anyone might evolve to. And so if you're respectful and develop good relationships with as many people as you can, it may pay off down the road. And that's a great lesson that I think students need to hear. Are there anything, other comments that you can make about being a professional, especially when it comes to being a physical education teacher?
Yeah, the best quote I've ever heard is, every day is an interview. And whether it's for myself or whether it's for somebody in the credential program, every day is an interview, and you don't know it, but at some point, the way you act on a specific day is going to be assessed by a colleague or a boss or something along those lines. I worked with my master teacher and the assistant principal, who then became principal. And one of the teachers that was in there was the head football coach. And then when I got hired when they had an opening and I wanted to come back to Pittman, it was like, hey, I want to come back and teach, and I want to come back and coach. And at that point, I hadn't coached with him, but he knew that I was, a stand-up guy and I did good work in the classroom. So he didn't have a problem vouching for me. And then when he resigned and I was able to step in and take over the program, like, it was just all of those things that started in 2009, and that happened to me in 2019. So, I mean, that's where every day is an interview. And whether and most times it's going to be a position somewhere other than where you want. Like, some students are probably going to say, hey, I want to be at this specific school to teach. But the reality is that the way they act, somebody that they're interacting with is going to have connections at a school that has an opening that's going to get them on campus. That's going to get them on campus. Are we there?
Yeah, you're back.
That's going to get them on campus. And it's important that if they want that opportunity to teach, that their interactions and the way they carry themselves is always as if they're in an interview.
What is your favorite part about being a teacher and coach?
The daily interaction with the colleagues and the students and the athletes. Yeah, we're social creatures in general, but to work with people that you call your friends, and then to be able to interact and watch the students grow and develop. And that's where, like, PE is a different world. I have students that aren't super motivated, but they're not bad kids or bad students. They graduate, they contact me like, hey, can you help me with the workout? And they're super motivated to go work out now. For them, at 14, 15, 16, they just weren't motivated at that point. Their reality was that exercise wasn't important at that moment in time. And their whole vision and perception changed over the course of several years, and then to work with the athletes and watch them grow and develop as young people and individuals is pretty rewarding.
How do you
It fuels, huh?
I'm sorry, go ahead. It fuels what?
I was gonna say, just watching young people grow and develop, it just fuels your soul a little bit different than anything else.
I agree completely. How do you manage kind of the time, how do I want to say this? I mean, it's a huge amount of time out of your day, week, month, year to be a coach. How do you manage the responsibilities of teaching and coaching? I'm not sure if you have a family, but I'm sure you got lots of stuff going on. Do you have any tips for?
Yeah, I got 4 boys.
Okay, so you're a very busy man. You're a very busy man. How do you got tips for how to manage the time that it takes to put into coach?
Well, I mean, that's where I didn't bite off too much when I was young. I took small chunks and kept. Now, the first year of teaching, opening up a brand new school, that was insane, and that was something I wouldn't recommend. Being a first year teacher and a brand new school, that they had way too many roles that they needed filled, and that was a difficult challenge. But in general, it's just taking together, developing curriculum, and then as you develop your curriculum, I change it on a little bit, but the foundation is the same, and so that helps. So now I don't have to create a whole new curriculum every year. Just change the way I'm presenting it or teaching it or using a Chromebook or whatever it is. Just change the use of technology and some small pieces. And then as far as during the season, I mean, you're going to basically dedicate, for me, example, for football, we use our whole weekend to game plan and prepare for the whole week for football. So
does that drain you to put that much energy into the program, or does that kind of recharge you to feel like you're a part of something and you're doing something that you're passionate about?
It's both.
Both. Yeah.
It's both. Yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing about having the off season is you have an opportunity to kind of rejuvenate and do some new things that you want to try out. In that way, you're not so drained during the season trying to make changes, Excellent.
Cool. Well, 2 more questions for you. The first one,
Yep.
If you weren't teaching, what do you think you'd be doing? Because it sounds like you don't want a different job. I've only been talking to you for a bit, but it's pretty clear that you enjoy and love teaching. But what do you think you'd be doing if you weren't teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I love teaching. I say I have the greatest job in the world all day, every day. And it's not just because I'm a PE teacher, but the fact that I get to be outside most of the day is a nice thing. But I mean, you get to work with good individuals that are mostly willing they're open to suggestion. They're willing to learn. They're there. That's half the battle, so you're getting to develop young lives and try and make a difference. Obviously there's stress. There's going to be stress no matter what job you do. There's going to be things that you like and don't like. There's going to be bosses that you like and don't like. It's really about your perception and how you're going to tackle those challenges, but if I wasn't teaching, I'd be on a family ranch somewhere working the farm.
There you go. So outside, one way or the other is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And have you read any books? Have you watched any movies or listened to any albums that you would like to recommend to anyone out there that might be watching?
I mean, as far as albums go, I like Florida Georgia Line.
Okay.
Can't Say I Ain't Country or Dig Your Roots. Both those are great albums. Books, there's a couple leadership books from like Bill Walsh that talked about how they created their programs and the way that they wanted to implement their policy, and it talks about having to go against the grain a little bit and having to stand firm for what you believe in, and that it has to be your vision, and it's your job to make sure everyone else carries out your vision. Those are both good pieces.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending an hour with us and giving these students something to think about.